Jason Voorhees' horrifying backstory, destruction of innocence by society, Friday the 13th franchise explored. Created by Victor Miller and Sean S. Cunningham, Friday the 13th is a massive slasher film series that has earned over $755.6 million, only second to Halloween. The movies revolve around a young boy named Jason Voorhees, who became the victim of social bullying and witnessed the decapitation of his own mother. The incident left such a mark on him that he turned into a serial killer. Since the release of the first installment in 1980, he has gone to various places like hell, dreams, and even space to live and breathe in his natural instinct. Today, Marvelous Videos is paying homage to this great cinematic monster by deep diving into all the films that Jason ever appeared in. So hide your machetes, pitchforks, and all other sharp objects, because Jason Voorhees is on the way. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The childhood of horrors. The horror icon was born on Thursday the 13th of June 1946 to Elias and Pamela Voorhees. As a child, young Jason was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a brain disease in which the body produces excess cerebrospinal fluid, and this condition led to other ailments in Jason, like a deformed face, an enlarged head, and stunted mental growth. Jason didn't look, think, or behave like other children. This meant that he would be the subject of bullying at the hands of the school kids. As such, Pamela kept him within the confines of the house and isolated him from the entire community. Jason would live with her on the outskirts of the scenic Crystal Lake. Despite his limited and decelerated mental growth, one thing that Jason learned was that if he didn't follow his mother, life was going to be hell. This unquestioned and unconditional love for her would ultimately become the reason for Jason's gruesome crimes, but we must realize that his mother's decision to keep him away from society was an equal contributing factor. In 1957, Mr. and Mrs. Christie owned a summer camp near Crystal Lake, and they recruited Pamela as the camp's cook. Desperate for money, she took the role but was worried about her son. He had never seen or met many people in his entire life, let alone become friends with kids his own age. With no money to afford a babysitter, Mrs. Voorhees took her 11-year-old to the camp. Mrs. Voorhees' fears were about to turn into reality. Young Jason would spend most of the time with his mother instead of gelling with the others, and this led the summer camp kids to believe that Jason was a mama's boy and an easy target for bullying. Jason's unusual face brought him the unwanted spotlight, and his white mask was not helping either. A swarm of kids surrounded Jason, causing him to panic and run to the dock, but the kids were catching up. In a desperate attempt to save himself from his little tormentors, Jason jumped into the lake and presumably drowned, but his body was never recovered. Where were the camp counselors all this time? Well, they were busy making love instead of keeping a strict eye. After the incident, Pamela lost her mental peace and stability and sought to ensure that the camp never reopened and no other kids lost their lives. When the camp opened next year in 1958, she murdered the counselors Claudette Hayes and Barry Jackson because she accused them of Jason's death. When it opened again in 1962, the water was found to be unsuitable for public use. Following this, there were random fires throughout the 60s and the 70s in and around the surrounding properties. These strange events led the locals to dub it Camp Blood, and though the needle of suspicion pointed towards Pamela, there was no substantial evidence against her. The murder of Jason's innocence. The police ran a combing operation in the lake to find Jason's body, but they came up with nothing and the case was closed. Even Pamela believed that her son was dead, but somehow Jason had survived the drowning. He probably washed up on another end of the lake and lived on. It's not possible that he swam to the shore because his mother clearly said that he wasn't a good swimmer. It's also possible that he didn't at all know how to swim. The second film tells that Jason lived in a shack deep inside the woods. Now the question arises, how did he get there? We'll come to that in a bit. So Jason had no idea how to seek help or communicate with others and somehow ended up in the shack where he probably waited to be rescued by his mother. While Jason grew up presumably by himself, his mother was busy slashing young men and women. They never got the opportunity to see each other, at least until she died. It's possible that Jason started to believe that his mother passed away or was never coming, and he was on his own. He started to thrive on whatever edible things he could salvage from nature, be it edible plants and fruits, and sometimes meat from hunting small animals. The only good thing that came out of the events was that Jason became self-sufficient and independent of his mother's constant guidance. From a lonely child, Jason had transformed into a recluse adult with a crude lifestyle. Now, coming back to our initial question, how did Jason end up in a shack? And how did an 11-year-old with reduced mental capacities manage to survive the woods and live on his own? We believe that Jason was rescued by someone from the town of Crystal Lake. It could have been anyone, including Crazy Ralph, but we can't say who. We came up with the conclusion of a rescuer because Jason, in his later life as a mass murderer, didn't just showcase skilled weapon use, but also learn how to set traps and scare his victims before murdering them. For example, he scared Alice by keeping Pamela's decapitated head in the fridge. How did he come up with such an idea? The only logical explanation is that the young boy was picked up by someone and made to live in the dilapidated shanty. However, it is also a possibility that Jason's new guardian never intended for him to become a ruthless murderer. The rescuer only wished for Jason to learn hunting skills so that he could survive the woods on his own. But once Jason saw that his mother was dead, in fact murdered, he used these very hunting skills to wreak havoc on the trespassers and guests who came to the sleepy town of Crystal Lake. Number 1. A Mother's Revenge on Friday the 13th, 1980. As we mentioned earlier, Camp Crystal Lake saw its first murder in 1958 when an assailant killed 2 counselors named Claudette and Barry in cold blood when they sneaked out to make love. After the event, the owners Mr. and Mrs. Christie shut the camp. However, their son Steve invested around $25,000 to reconstruct the dilapidated site and restart monetizing it. He had employed counselors Alice, Brenda, Ned, Bill, Jack, and Marcy. 21 years later, camp counselor Annie Phillips is driven halfway to the reopened Camp Crystal Lake by Enos, a truck driver, despite warnings from elderly Crazy Ralph. After getting there, she hitches another ride from an unseen person who chases her into the woods and slashes her throat. Apart from the counselors, Steve also employed a few teenagers to help him with the construction because the deadline was just around the corner. Ned was the first victim of the film, whose body was dumped just above the bunk bed on which Marcy and Jack were having the time of their lives. After Marcy goes to the washroom, the killer kills Jack with an arrow and then follows Marcy and slays her with an axe. Bloody disgusting. All this while Steve had been away to stock supplies because a thunderstorm was approaching. He returned only to be stabbed by the killer. Alice and Bill are all that's left, but Alice later finds Bill's body pinned on a door with arrows. Horrified by the scene, Alice manages to flee out into the open, only to be picked up by Mrs. Voorhees, who introduces herself as a friend of the Christie family.
He didn't! Oh my god!
Mrs. Voorhees then narrates Jason's story and reveals the dark past that Crystal Lake was hiding within its depths. She reveals how she had been the killer and attempts to kill Alice, who manages to overpower her and ultimately decapitate her with a machete. The film ends with Christie rowing away in a canoe when Jason himself seemingly attacks her. Upon waking up at a hospital, she's informed by a police sergeant that they didn't find Jason or his body. The film was heavily criticized by critics for its resemblance with other horror classics like John Carpenter's Halloween. However, it is beyond doubt that 4 decades later, Friday the 13th and Jason Voorhees have become the turning points of the genre, specifically slasher and stalker films. Made at a budget of just over $500,000, it earned a whopping $60 million and gave stiff competition to horror hits of 1980 like The Shining and The Fog. The film's commercial and popular success owes its debt to strong actors like Adrienne King as Alice, Betsy Palmer as Mrs. Voorhees, and of course the future star Kevin Bacon as Jack. However, the factor that overshadowed the cast to make the film successful was the female antagonist. People expected a man with heavy boots and a pair of old leather gloves to be slashing the young victims throughout, but when Mrs. Voorhees revealed herself as the killer, people were taken aback and left thrilled. Number 2. Like Mother, Like Son, Friday the 13th, Part 2, 1981. The sole survival of the Crystal Lake massacre, Alice is shown recovering from the trauma in her apartment. It had been a couple months and Alice was at ease now that Pamela was dead. What she didn't know was that opening the refrigerator to get some food for her cat would be the final task of her life. She saw Pamela's decapitated head in there just before Jason Voorhees killed her with an ice pick. 5 years after the murder of Alice, a man named Paul Holt opened a training school for camp counselors. But out of a million lakes in the world, he thought a town with a history of camp counselor murders would be the right place to do so. At night, he tells the class about Jason's legend and how he may or may not be alive.
The girl who survived that night at Camp Blood, that Friday the 13th.
That same night, Crazy Ralph came to warn the group about Jason, but an unseen assailant overpowered him before he could do that. As is normal with people in horror films, Jeff and Sandra decide to sneak into Camp Crystal Lake out of curiosity, but were thankfully saved by Police Officer Winslow. But later, Winslow himself gets clawed with a hammer by a man in a gunny sack. The real action begins from this point as Jason slits Scott and Mark's throats. Jeff and Sandra are sent to the other world with the help of a spear, while Victoria gets the good old knife. Lastly, Paul is dismembered by Jason, taking the kill count to 10. Only Ginny survives because she used her psychiatric knowledge to wear Pamela's clothes and distract Jason, allowing her to kill him. This film isn't any different from many of the early sequels of the franchise, but is still one of the most important entries because it revealed that Jason had survived and wasn't just a figment of people's imaginations. Number 3. Jason fills the lake with blood in Friday the 13th, Part 3, 1982. The film begins right after the events of the previous installment, and Jason goes to a store to change his bloody clothes. Of course, he doesn't have any money to pay for them, so he just thinks it fit to kill the owners. Meanwhile, a girl named Chris and her friends come to Chris's old home in Camp Crystal Lake, where she was attacked by a masked man a couple of years ago. The event traumatized her so much that she was forced to leave town. She is back because she apparently wants to face her fears. Two of the friends, Shelly and Vera, get into an argument with bikers named Fox, Loco, and Allie. They followed them to Chris's barn, but Jason was already taking refuge there, and he impaled Fox and Loco with a pitchfork before beating Allie black and blue. Jason slices Shelly's throat and takes his hockey mask to cover his hideous face. The next few kills take place at a rapid-fire speed. He shoots Vera in her eye socket with a spear gun, slices a hand, standing Andy with a machete, kills pregnant Deborah with a knife. The practical joker Sheldon has his throat slit, poor Charles meets his death due to electrocution, and lastly Jason stabs Chili using a fire iron. Only Chris, her boyfriend Rick, and an almost dead Allie remain alive towards the end. But Jason shows his brute strength and crushes Rick's skull with his bare hands. What's he been eating in those jungles? We need a bite of that stuff. Allie makes a last and feeble attempt to kill Jason, but he finishes Allie once and for all with a machete. This distraction gave Chris the opportunity to attack Jason with an axe. Finally, Chris takes a canoe and drifts into the middle of the lake and has a nightmare about the decomposing body of Pamela Voorhees. The film is notable because it is here that Jason gets his famous hockey mask, and secondly, he bulks up into a hulking, muscular monster, a physical trait that continued in future installments. The kill count in this one rose to 13, and our favorite one is Jason using his brute strength to smash Rick's head into a pulp. The film remained essentially grounded in its former installments, but added a few more pointy objects for Jason to use. Also, this was the first entry in the franchise to be theatrically released in 3D. Number 4. Jason Dies, or Does He? Friday the 13th, the final chapter, 1984. Right after the events of Part 3, the police arrive at Chris's house and take Jason's body to the morgue. However, as he wasn't dead, he broke out of the place and on his way out, sliced the coroner Axel with a hacksaw and snapped his neck. Later, the nurse Robbie was greeted with a scalpel. The next day, another group of teenagers arrives at Crystal Lake to have their fates sealed at the hands of good old Jason. The friends arrive at Crystal Lake and meet Trish and her little brother Tommy, who has a fascination for monsters and villains. At night, the visiting pals throw a party that Trish attends. Not surprisingly at the party, instead of booze, blood starts to flow. While Samantha goes down due to Jason's machete, Paul takes a hit with a spear gun on his groin. Terry is hunted with a pitchfork, and Trish's mom Tracy is killed off camera. Trish goes looking for her, where she meets Rob, who tells her that he's the brother of one of Jason's victims and tells her that Jason is still alive and he was there to exact his revenge. The next ones to go are lovers Jimmy and Tina. After taking his kill count to 12, Jason kills Rob with a garden claw. Tommy and Trish secure their house, but Jason breaks in anyway. Little Tommy uses his knowledge of films and Jason's legend to shave his head and disguise himself as a younger Jason Voorhees. Using this opportunity, Trish slams Rob's machete on Jason's face but only manages to remove his mask. Ultimately, it was Tommy who picked up the machete and hacked Jason to his final death. Or did he? The film ends with Tommy embracing Trish at the hospital, but the boy has a maniacal smile on his face. The producers wanted to make this one the final installment of the Friday series, and hence it was titled The Final Chapter, but we know how wrong they were. This one was important because it introduced a young Corey Feldman as Tommy Jarvis, whose character would go on to become Jason's arch-enemy in future films. Also, this was the last flick to start immediately after its predecessor's plot. Number 5. Jason and the Child and Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, 1985. The evil look on little Tommy's face was not for nothing. He brutally murdered a prolific serial killer, and the memories of the incident manifested themselves as nightmares and panic attacks. He attended various psychiatric institutions and finally ended up at the Pinehurst halfway house that was headed by Dr. Matt Letter and his assistant Pam Roberts. Tommy meets a bunch of other kids at the institution. That same night, someone murders 2 men after their car broke down. As time passes, more murders come to the fore, and a waitress and her boyfriend meet the same horrific fate. The modus operandi of the killings match that of Jason Voorhees, and the police theorize that he's back from the dead to resume his murderous ways. Meanwhile, Tommy himself becomes one of the suspects because of his troubled past and connection with Jason. The next day, lovers Tina and Eddie go into the woods to have a bit of canoodling, despite being forbidden to venture out of the institution's premises. Naturally, such disobedience is bound to bear brutal consequences. The first one to go is Tina, and then Eddie meets with a similar fate. Meanwhile, Tommy, Pam, and another teen, Reggie, go to meet Reggie's brother, Demon. Somehow, Tommy gets into a fight with someone and runs into the woods after realizing that he's committed a mistake. As Pam and Reggie go to look for Tommy, more killings take place back at the outhouse. Soon, Reggie and Pam discover several corpses in Tommy's room, and not far from long, they witness a resurrected Voorhees. After a fierce battle, the teens manage to kill this resurrected Jason, only to realize that he was one of the paramedics who arrived when Joey was killed. The police reveal that this man was Roy Burns, Joey's father, and he sought revenge for his son's death after getting inspired by Jason's story of avenging his mother. The film ends with Tommy recovering at the hospital. He initially faces his fears and fights his hallucinations, but when Pam arrived to meet him, he hid behind the door wearing a hockey mask and holding a knife. Is he the new Jason? What's beautiful about the film is that it not only honors the previous 4 installments by using pointy and sharp things to commit the murders, but also carves out a thrilling path for itself into uncharted territories of copycat killings. Interestingly enough, the copycat killer's mask had blue stripes on it, unlike Jason's hockey one. So, for an ardent Jason fan, the film would not have been that much fun. The violence and gore are copious, with a kill count of 22, more than any of its predecessors. Despite the 22 bodies, the blood is fairly less. But don't you worry, because that's been made up for by the gratuitous amounts of skin show and humor. So, if you're in the mood to appreciate the beauty of a bad movie with a little story but a lot of laughs, A New Beginning is the way to go. Number 6. Jason meets his adversary in Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, 1986. After what happened at Pinehurst Halfway House, Tommy started feeling better. The hallucinations had reduced, but not gone. Following his release, he decided to go to Crystal Lake Cemetery, where Jason was buried, with the intention of burning Jason's body and facing his fear. Tommy tagged along with his friend Alan, and they reached the town's cemetery on a stormy night. They dig up the corpse, and Tommy experiences violent hallucinations about Jason. In a fit of rage, he impales the serial killer's body with metal rods. But just as he does it, lightning strikes the rods and Jason comes to life as an undead revenant. Jason kills Alan, and Tommy manages to flee and inform the sheriff Mike Garris that Jason is back. However, Mike knows about Tommy's past and assumes that he's been hallucinating again. Tommy is arrested and put behind bars. Meanwhile, two camp counselors, Darren and Elizabeth, are killed by Jason. Mike's daughter Megan arrives at the police station the following day to file a missing report for her friends Elizabeth and Darren. Tommy warns again, but no one pays heed to him. Later, Jason goes on to kill 4 more people and steals their machete. Jason also realizes that he now has superhuman strength, courtesy of his undead nature. The town of Crystal Lake had been renamed Forest Green as the residents didn't want to be reminded of the evil crimes that Jason had committed in the town. As children started arriving at Camp Forest Green, things begin to get serious and the killings more frequent. Mike realizes that Megan likes Tommy, so he escorts Tommy out of the town and warns him never to return to Forest Green. That night, Jason kills the graveyard's caretaker and a couple who witnessed the murder. However, Mike starts to believe that Tommy has now gone insane and has begun committing Jason-style murders. Tommy convinces Megan to help him kill Jason by luring him to the lake. The two agree on the plan, but Mike arrests Tommy on account of the murders. However, Megan breaks him out of the station and they both reach the camp where Jason had killed the counselors but spared the children. Jason attempts to kill Megan, but Tommy lures him into the lake and drowns him. Jason makes one last attempt to fight back, but this time, Megan does the trick. Tommy and Megan believe that Jason has finally been sent to his resting place, the water, but Jason is shown to be alive and awaiting another opportunity to strike. Jason Lives was the first film that transformed our titular serial killer into a supernatural monster. And from here on, he continued to remain a paranormal character. Despite being one of the least profitable films of the franchise, this 6th installment managed to earn positive critical reviews for its efficient depiction of violence and elevated grim humor. Number 7. Psycho vs. Psychic in Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, 1988. A young Tina Shepard attempts to escape the troubled household created by her alcoholic father. She gets on a boat and comes to Crystal Lake, and her father follows her. Due to her telekinetic abilities, she accidentally destroys the dock on which he was standing, and he drowns to death. Years pass and Tina begins to suffer from the guilt of being the cause of her father's death. Tina's mother Amanda takes her back to Crystal Lake to be treated under the care of Dr. Cruz, who secretly wants to harness her telekinetic powers. So instead of teaching her to control them, he instead subjects her to verbal abuse disguised as experiments. Tina one day gets agitated and goes to the same spot where her father died many years ago and wished that he came back. However, this simple wish freed Jason from his chains and brought him back to the surface to resume his killing spree. Next to Tina's house, a group of kids celebrate the birthday of their friend Michael. At the party, a boy named Nick gets attracted to her, and why not? Birthday parties are probably meant for love affairs in Crystal Lake. Later, Tina has visions of Michael being murdered at the hands of Jason, and the visions turn out to be true. Later, Tina and Nick leave to find her mother, and Jason merrily crashes the festivities. Russell and Sandra are killed at the lake, Russell by an axe and Sandra by drowning. After Maddie finds Russell's body, Jason kills her with a sickle. Ben gets his skull crushed, but the award for the most creative kill has to be Kate's, whom he finishes by shoving a party horn through her eyes. The evil Dr. Cruz momentarily saves himself by using Amanda as a shield, but Jason gets him too. It all comes to a standstill when Tina finds Jason and electrocutes him using her powers, but Jason is not human anymore. He's a monster from the dead who survived years of drowning. Tina goes on to use her powers to burn him and trap him under the debris of a large structure, but to no avail. In a strange turn of events, Tina unwittingly summons her father's spirit, which rises from the depths of the lake and chains Jason once more. The film ends with Jason's mask being found alongside painful whispers. We think that the real reason why Jason kills teen victims is not really revenge. He's probably just tired of how annoying, cliched, and obnoxious these post-adolescents are. But trust us when we say this, The New Blood portrays its teens as the most irritating bunch of kids in the entire franchise, and by now, you know that that's saying something. Nevertheless, the film gave us Kane Hodder as Jason Voorhees. He would go on to play the character in 3 more films. Did you know that Hodder played another supernatural serial killer as Victor Crowley in the Hatchet series? We deep dived into the Hatchet series in another video, the link of which we'll leave in the description. Don't forget to check that out. Number 8. From Lakes to Sewers in Friday the 13th Part 8. Jason Takes Manhattan, 1989. On a houseboat, a teenage boy named Jim scares his girlfriend Susie by telling her the story of Jason Voorhees. He goes a little far and uses a hockey mask and a knife, but the boat's anchor messes up Voorhees' chains and frees him. Next thing we know, Jason is on the boat and slashing the young couple. Meanwhile, a cruise ship named the SS Lazarus sets sail with a class of senior year students and teachers Dr. Charles McCulloch and Colleen Van Duzen. Somehow Jason comes aboard the ship and resorts to his natural instincts. He bashes wannabe rock star Jessica's head in with her own guitar before beating the chest open of a young boxer. Next, he chances upon Tamara right after she came out of the shower and stabs her with broken shards. Meanwhile, McCulloch's niece Rennie continues to see the visions of a young Jason on the ship. After Jason harpooned Captain Robertson thrice and slit his first man's throat with a machete, their bodies are discovered. Somehow Sean, Rennie, Colleen, and Charles McCulloch find a life raft and reach the mainland. However, upon arriving, Rennie gets abducted by 2 young stoners and the rest split up to get help. However, Jason becomes Rennie's blessing in disguise when he kills the abductors, freeing her. They soon reunite and go to the police, but Jason kills the police officer as well. After this point, more people go down and a chase begins between Rennie, Sean, and Jason. Jason chases the teens into a sewer that would be filled with toxic waste by midnight. Somehow they manage to escape him and Jason gets drowned in the sewage. Interestingly, when the water hit him, he reminisced about his childhood, and when it receded, Rennie and Sean saw what looked like a young Jason. The purpose of giving Rennie the visions about Jason's childhood is as unexplained as the fact that New York sewers get filled with toxic waste at night. Nevertheless, the film is supposed to be watched with the intent of witnessing another Jason Voorhees film and nothing more. And if you do that, you're golden. Friday the 13th 8 was the beginning of the theater of absurd that franchise later became. Number 9, To Hell and Back in the Final Friday, 1993. A few years after the events of Manhattan, Jason resurrects and goes back to Crystal Lake and stalks a woman. How he manages to travel distances from New York to Manhattan without getting noticed is beyond us. However, poor Jason didn't know that the lady was in fact an FBI agent who was waiting for him to attack. He falls into a trap and is obliterated by SWAT and FBI teams. Jason's charred and dismembered body is then taken to the morgue for autopsy, but the coroner thought it to be fit to simply eat Jason's still beating heart. Again, why he would do so is beyond us. Nevertheless, after the tasty serial killer heart meal, the coroner gets possessed and flees the morgue, but not before killing 2 agents and another medical staff. The possessed coroner returns to Crystal Lake and murders 3 teens. What's a Friday film without a few teens getting slaughtered? He then killed one of the two officers sent to investigate the murders and possessed the other. Meanwhile, a bounty hunter named Duke finds out that only Jason's blood relatives can kill him and send him back to hell, but if he possesses such a person, then Jason will become invincible forever. The only such relatives are Jason's half-sister Diana, her daughter Jessica, and granddaughter Stephanie, who is Jessica and Steven's infant child. Jason goes to Diana's house but is attacked by Steven, but Jason manages to kill his half-sister. The police pin the blame for the murder on Steven and arrest him. Meanwhile, it is revealed that Jessica's present boyfriend and reporter, Robert Campbell, is using Jessica to sensationalize the return of Jason Voorhees from the dead. Steve cannot let anything happen to his family and breaks out to reach them before Jason can. The possessed policeman reaches Robert and transfers Jason's heart into him. The Robert Jason then makes an attempt to possess Jessica but gets interrupted by Steven, who takes her into his car. However, Jessica doesn't believe Steven's story. She leaves him and goes to the police. Jason reaches the police station and kills everybody standing between him and Jessica. But wait up, Steven is still in the picture. He thwarts Jason's plan, something that an entire bunch of cops couldn't do. This time Jessica believes him and leaves with him to pick up Stephanie, but they discover that Jason has the child. If you thought that weird things were over, then hold on, mates. The Robert Jason once again transfers his heart into a police officer and attempts to birth himself through Stephanie, but Steven steals his thunder. By now, Jason's heart has turned into a demonic infant, which enters dead Diana's vaginal cavity to retake birth. Should we call it anti-birth? Oh wait, there's also a special mystical dagger that can truly kill Jason. Jessica manages to punch the dagger through Jason's heart, and the hands of Jason's victims tear the earth to pull him into hell. The film ends with Freddy Krueger's hand pulling Jason's mask into hell. We don't know what director Adam Marcus and writers Jay Hughley and Dean Lorey wanted to do with the script. We aren't sure if they knew what they did. Did they even watch the film after production and editing? Jason Goes to Hell involves mystical daggers, possession, a bit of mythology, and lastly, Freddy Krueger. Cinema has continued to show some weird stuff happening on screen, but turning a heart into a baby that crawls into someone's vagina to get birthed again is just pushing the limits. Having said that, we are also of the opinion that the film is nonetheless a fun watch if you are viewing it with a group of friends on a Saturday night with a few chilled ones. So good luck.
Up here!
Number 10. Psychopathic Freddy vs. Psychotic Jason 2003. For the sake of continuity, we will be exploring Freddy vs. Jason before Jason X, which is the 10th film and set in a futuristic world. Before we jump into it, let's just have a quick recap of Nightmare on Elm Street films, of which Freddy Krueger is the prime antagonist. So Freddy is basically a dream monster who kills people in their nightmares, but the effects are very real and reflect in the victim's real life. However, Freddy can only attack and kill if people know about him and fear him. If you have forgotten him, then he cannot attack. After the events of the 1991 Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, the residents of Springwood realized how Freddy functioned. They destroyed all things that belonged to or related to the killer, and those who remembered him were sent into quarantine. Now, because no one feared him anymore, Freddy was able to come back to the dream world. So he devised a plan to bring back from hell the immortal and equally horrific serial killer Jason Voorhees. Freddy appeared to Jason in the form of Pamela Voorhees and brought him to Springwood. Jason began his killing spree. Because the townsfolk thought that Freddy was back, this generated fear in their hearts. And Freddy got his powers back. Meanwhile, a young girl named Lori spends a night out with her friends Gib and Kia. Later, two more guys join in, but an uninvited Jason also comes over. Jason begins killing, but in order to stop Freddy's panic from spreading, the cops dub the incident as murder and suicide. However, things take a wrong turn when Jason kills one of Freddy's intended victims. The teens realize Freddy's plan and devise a counter strategy to take down Freddy by pitting him against Jason. They decide to bring Freddy from the dream world into the real world and take Jason, who was rendered unconscious by Freddy earlier, to Camp Crystal Lake. The two epic cinematic serial killers make Camp Crystal Lake a gigantic fighting ring. They use all their powers and skills to subdue one another. An explosion throws them into the waters and Freddy comes out, but Jason follows, and Laurie decapitates Freddy. The following day, Jason emerges out of the water with Freddy's head on one hand and his machete on the other. However, Freddy winks at the camera, and by extension, the audience, revealing that the nightmares for Elm Street and Springwood residents are not over just yet. This epic crossover was due since the early 90s, but since New Line didn't have the rights to both the supernatural serial killers, they couldn't bring the project to life. Once New Line got the rights to the Friday franchise, things started to fall in place. Director Ronnie Yu brought energy and style to the film, something which was missing from either of the individual franchises. The flick delivers what it promises, and we see quite a bit of Freddy and Jason on screen, unlike films like Jason Takes Manhattan, which were dubiously titled. For a Friday a Nightmare film, it gained largely positive reviews from both critics and fans. We have deep dived into the entire Freddy series in another video, and we'll leave the link in the description. Feel free to check it out. Number 11. The One in Space in Jason X, 2001. Probably after the events of Freddy vs. Jason, the US government arrested Jason Voorhees and kept him at the Crystal Lake Research Facility. They tried all they could to kill him once and for all, but never succeeded. Finally, scientist Rowan LaFontaine suggests that it would be best to put Jason into cryogenic sleep and save the town from his wrath. However, Sergeant Marcus and Dr. Wimmer believe that Jason's body has regenerative powers, and the new cells immediately replace the dead ones.
His unique ability to regenerate lost and damaged tissue.
They attempt to study him, but Jason kills them both. Rowan manages to put him to cryogenic sleep in a pod. Fast forward 445 years later, in 2455, humans have started to live on a new planet called Earth 2, and a group of researchers come to Earth and bump into the Crystal Lake Research Facility. There they find Jason and Rowan in cryogenic sleep and bring them on board. Due to Jason's thanatomorphic appearance, they believe that he's dead and leave him in the morgue, but revive Rowan.
Easy, easy.
Jason wakes up from sleep and resumes his regular machete business. One by one, the bodies begin to pile up. However, the crew upgrades a robot named KM-14, which has weapons and advanced combat skills. KM-14 seemingly kills Jason by severing his limbs, ribs, and part of his head. A distress call is sent to the base and explosive charge is set. However, Jason gets rebuilt by the ship's nanites and is transformed into a cyborg. After an intense battle and loss of many lives in the process, the ship crashes on Earth 2 with Jason in it. Is it a fact that when you make too many films on a particular franchise, you run out of directions to lead the story? Remember watching Leprechaun 4 in Space or Hellraiser Bloodline? Jason had been to hell and back in the previous films, so the only place he could go now was either underwater or into outer space. Making a film underwater is more difficult than doing the same above the air, and the producers made the obvious choice. However, in this one, they didn't see Jason as a supernatural entity with heavenly powers. Instead, they gave him a biological advantage and created a backstory around it. The undead monster was put under the lens of science fiction, and they went a bit far by even turning him into a cyborg. This was the final act in the extremely entertaining theater of absurd of the Friday the 13th series. However, 2009 had more of Jason Voorhees via a sequel. Number 12. The remake Friday the 13th, 2009. After taking Jason to places like dreams, hell, and space, the producers felt no new arena was left for him to continue his murderous spree, so they thought it fit to simply reboot the original film with current technological advancements and a fresh cinematic look. This 2009 remake starts on a similar note, with Jason witnessing a camp counselor behead his mother. However, instead of killing whomever came his way, here Jason abducts one of the teens because she resembled his mother. The film then revolves around this abduction and the people who come to look for the girl only to get slaughtered. What the film lacked is creativity, vision, and ambition. The script was slightly fresh, but the kills were horribly stale and copied. When one makes a reboot, it is essential to bring new elements into the fore while staying grounded in the original piece of work. However, the 2009 iteration lacks creativity and imagination, which led to a cold, critical, and public response. Number 13, Friday the 13th, the series, 1987. When Friday the 13th, the series released in 1987, it shocked viewers because there was hardly a mention of the iconic antagonist Jason Voorhees. And making a Friday series without Jason is like making Aliens without xenomorphs. It's unimaginable and almost criminal. Now, why do you think that is? The series starred Louise Roby as Mickey Foster and John D. LeMay as Ryan.
Me, Ryan the Lion.
Ryan and Mickey were cousins who inherited their uncle's antique shop named Curious Goods. However, the articles at the store were objects that were either cursed or once used in occult practices that the uncle carried out. Imagine something on the lines of Ed and Lorraine Warren's house. With the help of an occultist named Jack, the brother-sister duo set out to reclaim the sold articles so that no more lives were lost to the demons and ghosts. That's not even remotely the story of Friday the 13th. The reason for this anomaly is that the series was supposed to be titled The 13th Hour, but series producer Frank Mancuso Jr., also the producer of Friday films, saw an opportunity to bathe in the glory and money of his film franchise. Nevertheless, the series by itself is worth watching due to its good acting and stories. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.